Good evening, one and all. Take up one idea, make that one idea your life, think of it, dream of it, live on that idea. Let the brain, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea and just leave every other idea alone. This is the way to success. Swami Vivekananda. On behalf of Vivekananda Institute of Indian Studies, a unit of Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, I am Bhargavi, welcoming you all to today's webinar held ahead of the occasion of Vivekananda Jayanti, which is also celebrated as the National Youth Day. Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, SVYM, is a development organization started in the year 1984 and engaged in building a new civil society in India through its grassroots to policy level action in the health, education, and community development sectors. SVYM runs 7 institutions and 40 plus projects in the sectors I just mentioned, having its presence across all districts of Karnataka. We at Vivekananda Institute of Indian Studies have been conducting programs to promote and facilitate the development and dissemination of Indian culture, spirituality, arts, music, and the like. We are also offering various customized courses in the context of India and internships to both international as well as Indian students. 12th January, the birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda, is celebrated as the National Youth Day. Swami Vivekananda was an eminent Hindu monk who spread the richness of Indian culture and heritage throughout the world while arousing the patriotism of his brethren in India and has been India's youth icon even to this day. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam, who is the founder and president of our organization, Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement. Having embarked on his journey in the development sector by living and working for several years among remote forest based tribal communities in the southern Indian district of Mysuru, Dr. Bala Subramaniam is a widely respected development activist, leadership trainer, thinker, and writer. He has a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University. His living habits were greatly influenced by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, and at the age of 19, he founded the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement based on the principles of Ahimsa, Satya, Seva, and Tyaga. He has spent the last 36 years of his life in the service of the rural and tribal poor in the forests of India. He is also the founder and chairman of the Grassroots Research and Advocacy Movement, a public policy think tank in India. Dr. Balu embodies a rare blend of grassroots and macro perspectives and policy through his multifaceted experience of more than 3 decades. He is a Tata Scholar, a Mason Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School, and a Fellow at the Hauser Center for Civil Society, Harvard University. He is currently a visiting professor at Cornell University, USA, and at IIT Delhi, India, where he teaches courses on leadership and human development. He coaches and mentors seniors leaders in the non-profit, corporate, government, and educational sectors globally. Apart from running leadership workshops for people from these sectors. He is also a member of the technical group set up by SEBI for setting up the social stock exchange in India. His books, Voices from the Grassroots and I, the Citizen, are a compilation of narratives and reflections of a development activist and are now globally acclaimed. His latest book, Leadership Lessons for Daily Living, has just been released. Before handing over the session to Dr. Balu, I wish to request the participants to post your session in the chat box as the session goes on, and it will be taken up during the Q&A, which will be moderated by Mr. Sukrit, my colleague. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Now over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhargavi, for inviting me to share thoughts on Swami Vivekananda, the man for the moment. All of us know that tomorrow is a special day for those of us, virtually for everyone in India, I would suppose, inspired by the life and message of this extraordinary, um, how do I describe him? Cannot describe him as a person, cannot describe him as a personality. It's very difficult to describe whom I would consider uh, as close to the expression of divinity that you could possibly see in a mortal frame. Uh, so let me first, the talk as I understand is on man for the moment. So there are two elements to this. First is the man. Like I already mentioned here, the word man cannot be in the limited construct of a physical body or a mortal. So I just described Vivekananda to the extent that I can understand him. Several years ago, I had written a book, I think more than a decade ago, called SWAMI VIVEKANANda as I See Him. And I was just flipping through it a few weeks ago in the context of another talk that I was giving. And strangely, I was asking this question to myself: did I write this book? Did I really have these thoughts of Swami Vivekananda? I think several of you who have tried to understand his life and message, when I was first introduced to him purely by accident in a very young age, and I started reading him, that is when I was 17. I had no idea that my life would become what it became, uh, and no understanding of how things would unfold for myself. To me, it was just another book I was reading to keep myself occupied. So I was more interested in whiling away time at the Ramakrishna Mission in Bangalore, looking serious and trying to be very uh, interested in something which aligned with their philosophy. That is my first introduction to Swami Vivekananda beyond the actual photograph in the college in which I studied in Bangalore. So, but the point I'm trying to make is what I understood of Vivekananda at that time would be pretty much what any other 17-year-old would have understood. So, to me, simplistically, his message was very inspirational at that point of time. Within the next 2 months, I had read pretty much everything that he wrote. Because now it is captured as 8 volumes, then now it's 9 volumes, the complete work of Swami Vivekananda. So, my impression of the man at that time was simply a great nationalist, a great patriot, possibly a great humanist, whose heart bled for the poor, whose heart really was for the masses of this country. So somebody else might have seen him as a monk. Somebody else might see him as God. Somebody else might have seen him as somebody who set up a great institution. Somebody could have seen him as an extraordinary manager. So at that point of time, to me, what Vivekananda meant in a simplistic way was somebody who really felt for the poor, the marginalized, and the downtrodden. And the way he describes it, he says, "Feel, my children, feel. Feel for the poor, the marginalized, and the downtrodden. Feel till you think that your heart will stop, your head reels and your heart stops and you fall down dead. And then shall come indomitable power, the power that he talks about coming from inside." So statements like that, that kind of expression he had for the feeling for the poor and the downtrodden. Two, any 17-year-old who I believe everybody at 17 is sort of a deep down socialist who believes that the world can be changed, everything the world can be made equal. All we have to do is wave the magic wand called socialism and the world will be pretty much a better place. I think we are all naive enough to believe at that age that we can actually end up doing that. And to me, words like "I do not believe in a God or religion," which cannot wipe away the widow's tears or bring a piece of bread to the orphan's mouth, sounded exactly the kind of socialism that I was hungry for. And coming from somebody who was adored as God, is pretty much in India, even at that time, I thought, wow, these are words which really may have a meaning. And just about when and I was living through the confusion of not having got into a program in a professional engineering college that I wanted, struggling to find my own identity amidst the crisis of belonging to a family which aspired that I would go abroad. Words like, I call every young man a traitor who, having been educated at people's expense, pays not the least heed to them. It somehow hit me hard. And they said at that time I saw him as somebody calling me out as a coward, calling me out as a traitor, calling me out for not really being considerate about the masses that he was talking about, not wanting to do something for these people. So at that moment of time, for me, the man was a powerful inspirer of men who actually believed that you could transform Indian society by giving a call to the youth of this country. So from that, my evolution of his understanding, if I were to use Vivekananda's own words, the man's own words, he says we entire life's journey is a struggle for moving from one level of truth to the next level of truth. It's not the truth is this, truth is absolute. The way he describes it, possibly in the Vedantic sense, it's absolute. But then our ability to absorb truth is sort of, it's multiple layers. We go from one layer of truth to the next level of truth. And to me, the level of truth with which I understood Vivekananda at 17, as a man who's desperately trying to even understand himself or beginning the journey of trying to understand myself and holding on to the psychological straw that Vivekananda's message provided, I saw in him, in his message, the need to be doing something different, need to be doing something which he was giving a call to. So at that point of time, it is one level of truth. And I think the last 36, 37 years, I've been trying to read more deeper and deeper and try to understand the person from a different lens every time. I think I get a different message every time. And the only explanation I can give to myself is not that the message of Vivekananda is changing, but the moment in which I'm living is constantly changing. And we're also evolving. I'm going from one level to the next, possibly higher. That's what I would like to believe. And in that pursuit of understanding oneself better, our antennas get refined more and more and it becomes better and better. And therefore, our ability to interpret Swamiji, it's not that this message is changing, but our ability to interpret the message of this great man changes. And so to me, from a nationalist, from a humanist, from somebody who was a compassionate person wanting to elevate and make sure every hungry man was fed, every person without clothes was given clothes, every person down the street, the last mile, the last mile was taken care of. It became a journey of trying to understand what else could this man be saying. So to me, the man all of a sudden was not just an inspirer. I saw in him a very astute politician who understood that India, at the context in which he was living, was an India which was colonized, was an India under enormous slavery, not just political slavery, but slavery of a different kind. The context of we believing that we are incapable of anything extraordinary, we coming from an extraordinary civilization, having lost our connect to the civilization history of this country, having lost our ability to see how great the nation that we had in the past, and believing that the British will take care of all this nation's future. No, we lived in a time when we were made to disbelieve our own abilities in education. We had maculaized system where we thought working as an ICS officer or working for the British or joining the police force controlling our own citizens was what you had to aspire for. We had forgotten the very understanding of what contribution this country had given. And so we were a nation without an identity. We were a people without an understanding of ourselves in the context of Indianness. The Bharatiyata that Vivekananda wanted us to feel was completely lost. So in that particular context, here was a man who realized that if you were to give an abstract call, if you were to give a call of come on, you all have to work hard for your moksha, might actually have found a few takers only. But then, if he gave the call in a different language, and that's exactly the power and brilliance of this extraordinary leader for me. So, in one sense, I saw him as an astute politician who understands not the way politicians are described today. So, don't get me wrong. Today, the use of the word politician itself is a messy thing. But I'm using it from the context of somebody who understands the polity of the country, who could feel the pulse of the citizenry of that country at that time, giving an extraordinary call of saying that what matters is your evolution, but then that evolution should be understood from an outer manifestation. And he gave this call to this institution that he set up, the Ramakrishna Mission, Matan Mission, where he called it Atmano Mokshartham Jagathitaya. The brilliance of that individual was talking about what matters is our own inner salvation, our understanding of our own self, the discovery of the self. But that need to be attained not by sitting in a cave in the Himalayas and meditating, which is one possible method, but by working for the amelioration of citizens around us. This same thought is reflected in the letter that he writes, and I'm in Mysore, many of us are from Mysore, in the letter that he wrote to the Mysore Maharaja, where he brings about 2-3 elements very powerfully, beyond just the language and the brilliance of his command of English. Let's unpack this man who had the capacity to talk to the Maharaja of Mysore, was a very well-known king, somebody who had actually Finance is going abroad. Somebody who saw in him an extraordinary saint, a sannyasi for this country, he writes to him and calls him out and says, the vanities of life are transient. So in one sentence, he sort of comes out with this understanding of what the world needs to be. And we need to keep this in mind when I go into the moment and how his teaching is still relevant to us. In one sentence, he calls out that consumerism and consumerist philosophy, that which is so extravagantly seen today, is not what life is all about. No, the entire struggle for life today is about what do I study, where do I work, how much do I earn, what kind of car do I drive, what kind of house do I live in. We have failed to see them as useful necessities of life. And we are now caught in the trap of looking at them as absolute luxuries which we have to enjoy. So the transience of life, the vanities of life that he called out. No, it is not just seeing a means of transportation, but seeing the car as a symbol of prestige and I have arrived in society. It's a difference I'm trying to make. So in this one sentence, the man called out and said, the vanities of life are transient. But then he gives you a purpose. He gives you a purpose which combines you to the very understanding of living, not just a physical life, but something deeper. And he says, but he alone lives who lives for others. He doesn't stop there. He talks about the rest who don't have this ideal in life and says, the rest are more dead than alive. So look at the man, and who even in 120 years ago writes and says that at this moment of time, what we need is an understanding that as much as you worry about amelioration of the masses as a powerful expression of inner understanding of oneself, we also have to base it on the foundational understanding that all the life that we see outside the Jagat of Maya and the illusory nature of existence, he calls about the transience of that, and then exhorts people to say that we have to live for others, gives meaning to our life and say, we got to give, you know, and in a generation which was constantly looking for possibly reasons not to get sucked into the larger vortex of the national scenario at that time, giving them a reason. And I believe it was his two statements. His own brother, who was a great communist of those days, he even remarked, it said, if Swami Vivekananda, if Narendra had not been Vivekananda, it would have been possibly India's one of the greatest communist leaders. So in one expression of concern for others, the way he manifested at that moment of time. So his political thought is one way of looking at him. The man and his inspirational message is another way of looking at him. Looking at that person as somebody who could be a mentor, could be an advisor, could be a guide, could be a guru to hundreds of people across the country and the world even. At the level in which they could understand not just themselves, but the philosophy of life itself is something very powerful. Looking at him as, as a saint, as a philosopher, is one way of looking at him. Looking at him as a social reformer. So you look at him from different dimensions, and our ability to understand that space will possibly give us a better understanding of the man himself. And like I said, the master strategist that he was, who understood that man has to progress in this world by looking at both the external nature outside as much as the internal nature out within. Now, his entire philosophy, Swami Vivekananda's entire message, finds his foundational existence in the Upanishads. And he constantly says this, and everything that he learned at the feet of Bhagavan Ramakrishna. He had no hesitation in saying that, in one place he even says, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa could get thousands of Vivekananda from a clod of earth. That was his conviction. So I'm just, after all, one little piece of that. And for that man to give the national identity driven by a civilizational strength, which was Upanishads, was his master strategy. And he never used it in a very prescriptive way. He brought it out, and possibly the first time anybody used the word practical Vedanta. And those of you, it's a small little book brought out by the Ramakrishna Mission. Those of you interested must make it a point to read that book, because we believe Vedanta is something dry. Vedanta is something that you sit and keep pondering over, and then the world will become a better place. But to practicalize it in the way in which Swami Vivekananda presented, I believe brings out his masterly brilliance of that strategist that Vivekananda was. So the man can be seen at once as a monk, as a philosopher, as a sannyasi, as a great leader of men, as an institution builder who understood organizational dynamics. Possibly these words were never coined when Vivekananda was around. Today we have PhDs in organizational dynamics, organizational development, organizational behaviors, organizational change management. And look at this extraordinary man who looked into the future to the point where he could say how organizations need to be built, how they need to be run, how should they be managed in the initial years of their existence, when they're conceived of, and later on as they evolve. He could even see the ego wranglings that could come up in institutions between people and amongst people, how organizations could get splintered, and what needs to be done to prevent that. So that extraordinary managerial thinking, and that he could document and put it down as guidelines for the institution, from organizational management to finance management to the way you reported and disclosed to the outside world. Look at the man and his thinking. So on one side, somebody who could believe that the masses have to be ameliorated, somebody on the other side who could call out people like the Maharajas and saying you owe a responsibility for your life for others, to calling out the young of this country saying that your real evolution is from the inside, which needs to be done by an expression of service to the outside. That is the man that we all need to be thinking about and looking and understanding. If this man and his message could be understood today, will this movement benefit from it? Will we actually be able to resolve and solve the problems the world is facing today? So let's just take a look. What is the situation today? How do we see the world today? We are all seeing chaos and crisis everywhere, compounded with COVID. Now, COVID in one stroke has made the world very leveled out and equal. COVID doesn't distinguish the rich and poor. COVID doesn't distinguish the advanced country and the poor countries. COVID doesn't recognize the leader or the follower. COVID doesn't recognize the poor and the rich. COVID doesn't recognize caste A from caste B or religion A from religion B. COVID treats us all equally. So in a sense, COVID situation, apart from the challenge that it poses to the health systems of countries and societies, is also a great messenger. A messenger where two, three things can be learned from it. If we could have lived the message of Vivekananda, could we have managed COVID itself better? Right? In one instance, it demonstrated the vulnerability of mankind itself. It also demonstrated the extraordinary bonding that mankind can actually exercise. It also demonstrated compassion and concern that several thousand people showed. Look at the migrant crisis in India and how thousands of kilometers along the street people had to walk and people fed them. Look at the extraordinary expression of humanism in that sense. So Vivekananda and this message, on one side he can be seen as an intellectual giant. To the other side, he can be seen as an extraordinarily compassionate humanist. And in the crisis that COVID reminds us of, the moment that we're facing today, in a very symbolic sense, I brought in COVID. But let's look at the world outside. A world separated, not united. A world polarized. A world which believes that I know best for what my people should have or my countrymen should have. A world which is narrowly interpreting everything that you can interpret. A world which narrowly interprets religion. Vivekananda himself said, I am proud to be a Hindu. And if I were to say the same statement today and say, I am proud to be a Hindu, I necessarily have to, the society necessarily understands it as, or I need to validate that statement as saying, as much as I am proud to be a Hindu, I hate every other religion other than Hinduism. If we reduce the understanding of love to a negative expression and saying that love is just love, right? If loving something means hating everything else, it's a very exclusive way of thinking. But look at the man, the concept of Vivekananda when he spoke at the Parliament of Religions, and he demonstrated the universal philosophy of India, the spirit of tolerance, and going beyond tolerance itself and appreciating everything as one. So this deeply embedded DNA in the message of Vivekananda is a unifying message of mankind, is a unifying message of interconnectedness, is a unifying message driven by the Advaitic thinking. And that is exactly what the world is desperately seeking today. Today, what the world is needing in a world which is separated by all these arguments. I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican, I'm a BJP guy, you're a congressman, and all this kind of everything is by definition is by what you're not today. And in that space, coming to say that we are all one. And this message of interdependence, this message of reciprocity, and this message of oneness, in which if I were to call it Advaita, it's a very confusing abstraction. But if I were to bring it down to a lived experience, it brings in peace, harmony, everything what the moment needs today. So all the failures and fallacies of society as we know it today are all expressions of a baser human being. And that's why Swamiji said the journey of human evolution is from one lower level to the next. And so this is a very normative thing. Understanding him from his message is that there is hope and there is expression of becoming better tomorrow. And that's a very powerful look at the world itself. So while well, the feeling of vulnerability is real, especially in a post-COVID scenario. COVID is still not over. We can't even call it a post-COVID scenario. We need to call it a COVID scenario. The hope that his message brings is driven not by some external messiah coming and waving a magic wand, a Vivekananda coming in and saying, I'll solve the world's problems for you, but calling us out and saying that perfection is inherent in you, telling us that spirituality is the expression of divinity manifesting inside every human being, and that expressing the divinity is what your life's journey is all about. Look at that as a solution for today's moment, a moment which is riddled with crisis, both personal crisis, familial crisis, societal crisis, crisis of the community. So I would like to look at today's moment in three buckets of crisis. The first bucket of crisis is we have destroyed the world as we know it by our mindless consumerist attitudes, that we have reduced this world to a state of absolute ecological destruction. Now, we are all consuming 1.5 times what the planet can give us at any point of time, which means eventually we're going to run out of a planet to even sustain us. With that kind of a deep down attitude of mankind. Next is a societal crisis, where the iniquities of the world are extraordinarily stark. I'm sure many of you have seen the papers recently that the last 10 months, millions of people have become homeless, poor, and lost their livelihoods. Whereas we have people like Jeff Bezos and people like Elon Musk, together between them, just two people have made more wealth in the last 9 months during the COVID crisis than the rest of the world put together. How do you even come to terms with this inequity? How do you even deconstruct this inequity? So whether it is economic inequities, whether it's financial inequities, whether it is status-related class inequities, religious inequities, today the world is driven by a sense of inequities. But a greater crisis, the way I see it, is a greater crisis of the self, crisis of the self itself. And that's exactly where the man for the moment is Vivekananda, because he begins with our understanding of the self. The journey of spirituality for him is a journey of discovering our inner self. The very purpose of this inner self, how do we apply it to a practical action? So if leadership is just, in Vivekananda's view, I would articulate leadership as an endless spiritual journey, a journey where the person constantly tries to reconcile his private inner narrative, his inner narrative of seeking himself, with an outer public narrative of serving society and being useful in a society that he's embedded in. And Swamiji's brilliance was not just limited to just being an individual or being just a great Indian. He was an extraordinary patriot. Now, following him, all of us would believe that we all have to work for India. But look at the way he describes it, which is so relevant for the moment today. The message where he says, he actually extorts his people and says, it's okay being selfish. The same man in one place says, selfishness is sin. He says it's okay to begin with selfishness. And that's such an easy way to understand it. Because if you were to give some young 18-year-old an abstraction and say, go work for society, he'll laugh at you in today's context and go away. But you begin and tell him that you begin with yourself first. Be well educated. Take care of yourself. He says you cannot do social service on an empty stomach. The way Vivekananda looked at societal work, he said you can't do it on an empty stomach. You can't even do it on an empty brain. So the man for the moment called us to take care of ourselves first. Start with the I. It may sound very paradoxical to what Swamiji might have meant, but the beauty is you can't see his message in isolation and stop with the I also. You got to expand it. And then Vivekananda says, expand it to look at something just beyond you. After some time, the restlessness inside you, the hunger of the inner expression inside you will lead you to believe that this is not what I really want. I've made all the money I want. I've got all the food I can eat. How much can you eat? You can only eat in one plate at a time. You can only sleep on one bed at a time. You can possibly only drive one car at a time or sleep in one house at a time. That's the maximum you can do. And then it starts catching up. And that restlessness tells you, what else can I do? And then Swamiji says, expand. And expansion is, that's what he talks about, the expansion of life. And in that expansion, we look at people around us. Maybe in the selfishness of expansion, we look only at our families. My father, my mother, my brother, my sister, my husband, my wife, my children. That's fine. That's the next level. That's evolution. So life is about one level of evolution to the next. We expand it in this moment of time, not being very ideological and say, I'll work for the world, but begin with oneself, equip oneself with all the intellectual necessities for this life, equip oneself with all the things that you need to take care of yourself first of all, and then expand it. But it doesn't stop there. Swami goes on and says, the next circle, it's a concentric circles kind of expansion. It's a very, what do you call it, centripetal, I don't know, the outward expansion. The next level of expansion could be saying, my neighborhood. What can I do to this neighborhood? How do I contribute to this neighborhood to make it a place of peace and harmony? How do I contribute to this neighborhood where I can reduce inequities? So the self crisis, beginning with the self, expanding the self, actually ends up in finding solutions to the other two crises of the moment, the ecological crisis as well as the crisis of inequity. Because as we start understanding the self and beginning from selfishness and starting the journey towards selflessness, in this beautiful journey, this transition, you realize not only the vanities of life that are transient, but also the meaning of really living your life for others, which is actual life itself. That expression of life is an understanding of the inner self. And that's the message of the man for this moment of time. And as you expand, you'll say, my neighborhood. Today, unfortunately, in our country, we reduced it to my jati fellows, my caste fellows. I think that's not what Vivekananda's message is. It's expanding to believe my neighborhood, my city, my taluk, my district, my state. And now we can't say I'm a Bihari, I'm a Kannadiga, I'm a Tamilian, I'm a Malayali. We have again got stuck at that level. That is not the moment of the need of the moment. The need of the moment is expand that circle and say, I'm an Indian, my country. And again, that's a limited thinking. That's all an opportunity for evolution, a growing phase. And then you come back and say, the whole world is mine, my universe, my humanity itself. Whether a child in Zimbabwe is starving or a genocide in Sudan is happening, we should feel as troubled as a death in the neighbor's house. We should be as worried and concerned about COVID numbers in the United States or Brazil and not say it's their country's mismanagement, let them suffer for it. We need to be as worried. And COVID presented that opportunity where we could demonstrate this concern for humanity, not in a limited way for our own neighborhood and people around us, but as a country. Whether it was India sending in HCQS tablet, whether it is scientifically valid or not, treatable or not, as a treatment intervention or not, when people felt it is important, we gave it. Our country's decision recently now to look at vaccine export or sending out ventilators. In different ways, we can express our own responsibility to society itself. Because the world today is no longer a place where polarization is going to be a solution. In fact, the problem of polarization separateness. We can say make India great again or make America great again. Every country can say that. But the limitation of that is we should talk about making India great along with the rest of the countries in the world. That is the philosophy of Vivekananda. Vivekananda's philosophy was making India great. He called India being a Jagat Guru. And embedded in that message itself is not only India understanding how to make itself great, but carrying this message of greatness to others and living this message of greatness as a evolutionary process for every country in the world. It is not about, it was a race in which if I were to use Swamiji's thinking and not his words, it's like a running race for humanity, where there's nobody needs to come last. Every one of us can come first. And that is the message of Swamiji. Today's world is built around such enormously selfish competition, where not only should I come first, everybody else should come last or behind me. To where Vivekananda believed all of us could run the race together to solve the world's problems, and all of us can come first. With this kind of thinking, just imagine the world that we can create, the powerful opportunity that we have ahead of us. So these are just some ways of looking at the man, the moment and the crisis that we are in, and finding solutions in the message, solutions that can call upon our inner self to find answers. Because if you understand Vivekananda's message and if you understand what the moment today requires, the moment today requires extraordinary leadership. It requires the qualities Swamiji stood for: intellectual gigantism with extraordinary humanism. Today's world requires such leaders. Unfortunately, we are stuck with leaders. If you look at what happened around the country, if you look at other countries and the struggle to retaining power, if you look at the patterns in every major country, whether it is China, Russia, Israel, where everybody looks at keeping power for themselves forever, where even people have failed to understand that real evolution is the grounded, enormous feeling of contentment that you feel in what the world would call a state of powerlessness. In real powerlessness lies real power. And appreciating that is extraordinary leadership. But that is where Swamiji's message makes such meaning, whether it is political leadership, whether it is spiritual, religious leadership, whether it is leadership at a small community level, a small little civic community of 100 people, whether it is little tribal ejmana in a tribal colony, at every level, this kind of selfless expression of living a life for others itself is one way of looking at it at the current moment. The second way is if we can understand that our life is best lived in the service of others. And what does service mean in Swamiji's talks? And if we can distill out his message, he starts out very simply in a way in which we can understand. He talks about service at three levels. The first level of service, in a very simplistic way, which every one of us can indulge in, is physical service for the body, whether it's running an orphanage, whether it is taking care of a child in a hospital, or it is healthcare or education, or food and nutrition. So many hundred different ways in which we express the service to the physical body. And as we do that, Swamiji says, as you become better and better, as your expression of service in a selfless way, as you start doing it, believing that you're actually instrument through which that work is getting done, you'll suddenly feel that there's something more I can do. And that is where Swamiji says intellectual service. Can we help people become better in their understanding of society around them, giving them awareness, giving them knowledge, building schools, building institutions of learning in a real sense. And then that is the next level. And Swamiji says, finally, the level of spiritual service. Now, I can definitely confess and say that I don't understand how we can really serve anybody else spiritually. But one thing is for sure, if we can understand his message and lead a life where we are serving people physically and intellectually, with no expectation, with no transactional understanding of somebody will give you an award or a reward or a Nobel Prize for your work, you evolve spiritually. So greatest spiritual service you do is not for others, but to yourself. And that is what today's world requires. Because we all talk of love. We all talk of happiness. We all talk of extraordinary spaces where equity happens, but nobody knows how to do it. The how of it is not described by anybody. The simplest way is to starting with ourselves. If we are able to understand that solving the self crisis of myself as a person is the first step in life, understanding building my own personal human capital, whether it's the physical sense, the cognitive sense, the emotional sense, or the spiritual sense, and then looking at people around me. And if I live a life of a role model, if I live the life of living the message of Vivekananda, I don't have to even teach. People around you are going to get it. And in different ways, he expressed himself in all very small anecdotes I can share. Simple things like he constantly used to harp on the smallest detail, he would say. He would say perfection in the smallest detail. Now, when you're doing some task, I find many times, not I'm sure outside this country too, but in our own country, we seem to become very tolerant of mediocrity. We all seem got so used to being such mediocre ways of expression of ourselves that we are all okay and content with it. But feeling very enormously agitated, perturbed, and this desire to express that perfection by letting go of the mediocrity and excelling in whatever you do, that urge to excel is the fine small details that you pay attention to. Things like paying attention to the means as much as to the end. Look at this extraordinary person where it is a statement which is embedded in the world of moral reasoning, ethics, and values, where it's not just the end outcome of what you do, but in the very expression of how you do it, the means mattering as much as the end. This is something which we need to learn from him. Understanding that it's not about you, but the work that needs to be done. Seeing yourself as an instrument, not getting carried away in the egoistic burden of saying, I did it, but things are getting done through me, is what the world needs today. The moment of today needs that. And that is something you learn from him. Giving yourself the expression of seeing God in man. That is one of his highest expression of this leadership that he spoke about, is seeing God in man is what the world needs to understand today. You don't have to recognize the God, but let's at least if you do your service in a non-transactional way, saying that this is my expression of divinity for him. This is the service I do to the inner divinity in the other person. You reduce the transactionality of what you do. You transcend helping somebody to actually serving somebody. And this is the message that we need to carry. But amongst all this, reminding yourself that you are a nobody. He describes it so beautifully, especially when you're building organizations, etc. He says, when you start doing all these things, you start believing that you are doing a lot of good things, a lot of great things. Everybody falls into this trap, and I'm no exception. I've also gone through the cycle of feeling that, oh, I must be really good at what I'm doing. But then understanding and getting the humility to say that no, there's something higher force. In fact, he writes it so beautifully. And many times I believe he wrote it for all of us at the Vivekananda movement. He says all the hospitals you build, all the schools you construct can crumble to dust in one earthquake, can get washed away in one flood. So this message that you are just there to be used by a higher force, and that force will find an expression through you for the welfare of others. Swamiji says the cow which gave birth to the calf already is wired to feed milk. You don't have to teach it anything or tell it anything. So God who gives is ensure that we are all here today, who is very responsible for our existence, knows how to take care of us. But getting an opportunity to be part of the journey in playing the role that God has mandated for us is what we need for this moment. So it's not just the skill sets that we need to have today. It's not just about learning extraordinary things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, but to have the basic human intelligence to understand that actually the journey towards divinity is the expression of being human itself. And this is the message for the great man for the moment of today. So I can keep going on talking about Vivekananda. It's very energizing even for me. But I'm going to pause and hold on and would love to engage more and be open to having more time for questions. If that is okay, Bhargavi, so I'll have more time for questions. And then I'm hoping that you will be reading from the chat box of people will be asking. And you said Sukrit will be moderating it. So to me, I want to end my talk with one uh, a book which I have enjoyed reading in the past and discussing the book with the author. The author's name is Elena Stark, and the book is titled The Gift Unopened. This extraordinary person. She was a historian whose PhD was on history and historical evolution of the United States. As an American citizen, she and her husband had come out after fleeing a war-ridden Germany, escaping Hitler's brutality and coming into the United States as young people. And then they settled down, became Americans, and then they started doing a PhD. And she did a PhD in history. And she recognized that America had changed in the last decade of the 18th century, 19th century, 1890 onwards. And she couldn't figure out what happened. When she went deeper into understanding that, she realized something swept across America which changed the people. And she says this was the enormous force called Vivekananda which swept across America. And in the book, she says God smiled at the United States and gave her a gift, the gift called Swami Vivekananda, who came to Chicago and then for the next 9 years of his life gave the whole world this message of universalism. He says, unfortunately, Americans are yet to open this gift completely. So I believe, and it's in anguish, I would say, Indians also haven't opened this gift called Vivekananda completely. Each of us feel a little bit of Vivekananda. We think we understand him. We think we have. Now he's even monopolized by a few forces saying that they understand Vivekananda. But Vivekananda belongs to the world. Vivekananda is an idea. Vivekananda is a force. Vivekananda is something indescribable. It's easy to put him in a photo out there and say that's a photo we understand and can relate to. But deep down, we need the real understanding of Swamiji and his message. The understanding that there's a Vivekananda embedded in each of us. And discovering that man within us, discovering that divine Vivekananda within us, expressing that divinity as a service to mankind is the way we can celebrate his life and message. And that is what January 12th should remind us. January 12th is not an occasion to put up a photograph, show Mangalarti and say, this is great. These are ideas of Swamiji the world needs, etc. But learning to live his message as an everyday expression of life in whatever we do, whatever we think. For Swamiji, he said purity, patience, perseverance. That's what this movement needs today. And purity for him was thought, word, and deed. Every aspect of our life. If we can cultivate and live the call that he gave, if the youth of India can do that, resurgent India is not just a dream. Swamiji said, I want to see Mother India on a resplendent on her throne, giving this message to the whole world, the message of Vishwaguru that she needs to tell to the whole world. That is possible and that is necessary. And that's what we can do. So I'm going to stop, pause here for some time, and then wait and see if I can look at your questions and try to see if I have any answers for them. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I think we will get along with some of the questions put up on the chat box. Meanwhile, I once again request all the participants to put up the questions if there are any on the chat box, so that we'll be able to take one by one. And the first question, sir, from Nagashri Gurunath. What is the relevance of the kind of patriotism which was required during his time as compared to today when we no longer are colonized?
Uh, Mrs. Nagashri, I believe that we are still colonized. Well, we are not colonized by an outside force, a political force called the British. We are colonized in our thoughts. We are colonized to believe that we are weak. We are colonized by powerful forces like called Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, etc. We have all become victims of the current situation today. We are colonized by consumerist ideas. We are colonized by several forces, understanding of which we really don't have. And getting out of this colonization is also real nationalism, but in the understanding of the country. What India needs today is an expression of patriotism, not as fighting some outside enemy, not as some fighting the neighboring countries, but as fighting poverty within our country. It's an expression of fighting for making people's lives better, fighting for citizenship, fighting for true expression of democratic ideals, fighting for a sense of equity and equality amongst all citizens of this great country of ours, fighting for restoring the civilizational ideals of Tyaga and Seva that Swami Vivekananda himself spoke about, and Ahimsa and Satya that Mahatma Gandhi wanted us to live. And all that, not doing all that, in a sense, is a colonization. Giving up the extraordinary beliefs that this, not in a very romanticized, subjective, emotional way, but in a very clear, objective way, the greatness this country had in the past, re expressing it, resurging those ideas and values today, is getting out of that colonization. And to me, that is the expression of patriotism that this country desperately needs.
Yeah, in continuation, of course, we have a question from Dr. Preeti Bhatt. How do we instill the value of honesty in the youth today, where social media is so dominant? Is there a framework we can create starting from families, schools, clubs, or for a better society?
The answer is very simple, Dr. Preeti. Framework is Dr. Preeti herself. Just live those values. That's the only thing you can do. We all spend so much of time worrying about people around us. We're all the time concerned about changing everybody else without recognizing that we need to be the change we want to see. That is the simplest and possibly the only way to bring about societal change. Social change is not about the other. Social change is about your societal expression of the change happening within you. And for that to happen, it's very simple. If you really understand Vivekananda's philosophy, you will understand that staying focused on the unchangeable, staying focused on the extraordinary conviction that you are the Atman, the unchangeable, is what will give you the ability to change the world. But are we living with that conviction? No, it's all very simple. I remember, we used to get Amar Chitrakatha comics those days. I'm sure Sudarshan will remember. We all used to exchange and read all those. I'm sure today also a lot of people will be reading it. We all read about Rama, Harishchandra, everything. And reading Harishchandra's
Yes,
comic,
sir.
you might tell your child or son, you should all be like Harishchandra. You should all not tell lies at all. You must all be very honest all your life. And then you get a phone call from your friend whom you don't want to speak, and your daughter or son rushes up to the phone, picks it up, and puts it to the ear. And you ask, who is it? And he says, Amma, Kalavati is calling you. And you say, please tell I'm not there, please tell I'm not there. you know and we think that's honesty, and your son is confused. On side you say be like Harishchandra, other side you are not being like Harishchandra. You're there at home and you're telling your son to say that you're not there. We think it's silly, but relook at your life, relook at it from morning to night. How many times in our mind at least we get corrupted? How many times we get intellectually perverted? How many times we think of thoughts which are not really in the domain of purity, and then we expect others around us to change? So I believe, Dr. Preeti, the best formula for change, and the only thing you can actually do, is change yourself. And the conviction that if you know that you are the unchangeable, if you know that inside you is unchangeable Paramatman, part of the Paramatman, your Atman, and then from that will come the enormous power to change the world by just living the change itself.
Thank you, sir. We move on to a question from Mr. Vasant Kumar Mysurman. How can we ensure clean politics when criminals, dons are sitting in the parliament making policies for innocent people who have given them a huge mandate? Of course,
I
in the
don't call
context of Vivekananda. Yeah.
I don't call people who gave them a huge mandate people who are innocent. Today's world, Mysore Mutt also knows this as much as I know. Mandates are bought and sold. So it's not people who get part of the trading of mandate are not innocent. So I would not agree with you, Vasant, saying that people are anyway innocent. Innocent bystanders also become collateral damage and they suffer. So I would give the same answer I gave Preeti. If people start believing that they need to be part of a system which is not going to encourage being part of the trading, buying, and selling of electoral democracy. That is the beginning of change. And I'm an optimist, as you know. Things are changing. There are a lot of changes happening, but we are not able to see the change because we want it to be measured in real time in an enormous pace. We all are used to a generation of control, alt, delete, and we press the buttons and we think the whole world will become different tomorrow morning. But the very fact that there are questions being asked, questions that you raise at your age, questions that I struggle with and many of us struggle with, that itself is a beginning of the change. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, nobody was asking these questions. At least we have begun asking these questions. And soon there'll be a generation of people, a restless generation which is no longer taking status quo for an answer. And that generation will find solutions. So I believe that is a phase where we have got so obsessed with just ourselves and our future that we don't see a nation or a society. Understanding Swamiji is going beyond that ourselves into expanded concentric circles I spoke about. And as we discover one circle after the next, I'm absolutely confident and hopeful that this country will start having a better and better future for itself.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Dr. Mohan Kumar has a specific question about development. Probably, I think I would take this question in the context of
Thank you,
Vivekananda.
sir.
Can you please put up some light, throw some light on what is development? Is it the development what we call that we are having today?
And what does development mean in Swamiji's words? We got to see development in two contexts. One is very simple, the outer context. Swamiji spoke about the outer world as much as the inner world. Outer world is very simple, and unfortunately, the society has got to measure development from economic terms, from simple income growth terms, or purchasing power parity, and those kind of terms. The 5% GDP growth, the 8% GDP growth, the $5 trillion economy. These are all because we only have a scale. We think everything should be measured only with that scale. We don't go deeper. In Swamiji's life and message is what helped me fashion the statement of building human and social capital. Vivekananda believed that an expression of real existence should be in four domains. He said, muscles of iron and nerves of steel, that is the physical body. Vivekananda is a great, he was the fellow who was constantly worried about building his body. He was a bodybuilder and worked hard in his young childhood for exercising, etc. So we need to keep that in mind. That is why today's education systems cannot be devoid of building and taking care of your body. In what way we teach our young to take care of themselves? We have no idea of how our children have no idea how to take care of their own selves, right? Whether it's the food they eat, the air they breathe, the water they drink, or the exercise they need to do. Today, there's very powerful need to understand that only when you are physically taken care of yourself are you promoting the prefrontal cortex. Swamiji possibly had understood it. So physical growth and then cognitive growth. He had as much understanding of how you need to be intellectually a giant. He was as fluent in anthropology as much in archaeology. Even in some of his lectures, he talks about neurobiology. He talks about management. He talks about organizational development. In different contexts, he talks about psychology. He talks about history of nations. He used to talk about poetry as though he was an extraordinary critic of poets, right? And he would also challenge people. And he had this extraordinary memory and concentration where he could read volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica in a week and then answer any question from any page. We've all had anecdotes of all that. So the cognitive development is also important. Emotional development. Do we even teach our people how to manage themselves? We teach our children everything else except that, right? And so interpersonal development and intrapersonal development. How do you deal with others? How do you deal with your own self, your anger, your sadness, your sorrow? That's the internal nature Vivekananda spoke about, as much as the external nature. So it's both inter and intrapersonal intelligence that we need to worry about. And also telling our young in the future that the real purpose of life is a discovery of the inner self, and that is spirituality. Spirituality in Swamiji's message is about practicing self-enquiry, asking ourselves existential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I born? Why am I attending this lecture even? What am I going to gain by this? Asking those fundamental existential questions, challenging yourselves. The entire philosophy of Advaita in Ramana Maharishi's words were just three words: who am I? If you can constantly keep asking yourself this question, ego, all these things, interpersonal conflicts, inter-country conflicts, everything will come down. But so development is focusing on building physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual capital. So it is not somewhere outside this world I got these thoughts. It's basically Swamiji's message. And also embedding yourself in society. He said, live, you alone, they alone live who live for others. How will you understand others if you don't have the social intelligence for it? So human development is also about understanding socially others and transacting in environments where society demands that you be part of it, embedding yourself in the problems of the people, being a part of them, being like the lotus leaf, like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa said, being in the water but not being affected by it. So being in society but not being disturbed by it. So human social capital. And then if you're not practical and connected to economic gains, nobody is going to follow you. So practicalizing Swami Vivekananda's life is begin small, begin with economic gains, and then it will outgrow itself into an idea which is so powerful that development context will change. So if you understand Swamiji's concept, every human being is important. Every stakeholder is important. So the very concept of benefit optimization, each one is great in his own place. That's what Swami Vivekananda said. This is possibly the highest expression of stakeholdership. Today, corporate entities are talking about moving away from shareholding to stakeholding. This is exactly what Vivekananda spoke in some other language. He might not have used the same words that business schools today use, but that is the meaning. Every stakeholder gets his legitimate due for the contributions he brings to the table. I bring X contribution, I only get for X. You bring 5X contribution, you get equivalent to what 5X brings it to you. So he said, look at his thinking. He said it is not by pulling down the rich, but by pushing up the poor should a new India arise. It is not by a revolution, but by an evolution should a new India arise. And that evolution is building human and social capital for national resurgence. So this is to me the understanding of development that Vivekananda, possibly his works have led me to believe.
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, I think I'm afraid we are running short of time, and then I would take one last question. Probably I would take two questions here related to each other, probably. Yeah. Ms. Tanuja wants to know, are there any specific measures which were stated by Swami Vivekananda to eradicate corruption? And one more question from Jivika. It's very interesting. Is it wrong if someone stands for oneself for the right against all odds? If not, why are we left alone at the end?
So, Jivika, let me ask you a simple question. Do you want to stand against anything that is wrong, or do you want a crowd with you? If you want a crowd with you, it's a different answer. But if you want to stand up for this world, for what you believe is right, why do you care if others are there or not? As long as right is on your side, that's what matters. What I say requires a lot of courage. What I say requires a lot of conviction. What I say will make you feel lonely. But if you don't want to be lonely, that's a different issue. But if you want to stand up for right, it's a different issue. So I think you got to ask yourself, what is it that you want? If you want to stand up for right, you will be a loser many times. But you don't measure your life by what you lost. You measure your life by what you stood
ಹಲೋ
by.
ನಾನು ನಿಮಗೆ
I
ಬಿಟ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾ
think
ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಈಗ
that
ಕೊಡ್ತಾ
metrics
ಇದ್ದೀನಿ
is
ನಿಮಗೆ
what
ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
matters. So I believe, Jivika, ask yourself, what do I want? I'll give a small anecdote which happened to me in my life itself. And we many times don't even understand this. It's a sort of a parallel metaphor, I would say. I don't say metaphor. It's an incident where I understood what do I want or what do I really live for. I was I visited a friend in Calcutta, and being a good friend, and coming from the NGO world, you always look for where you can stay without spending any money. where your stay is taken care of, where your food is taken care of. So you're always thinking, is there a Ramakrishna ashram there? Is there a friend there? Because Belur Math was far off. I had to stay in Calcutta city. I had to stay with a friend. And this friend told me he was newly married and he was very proud and happy to have me for dinner. And he was talking about his wife's great cooking. And after the food, he said, "You know what? You come to Calcutta after a long time. You must eat the pan that this fellow makes." I'm not really a fan of pan, but I have nothing against eating it once in a while. So I went with him to humor him. So there's a huge crowd, and I was confused. Why would anybody at 9:30 in the night stand in a long line, half an hour to eat one pan and come back? What is so great about this pan maker that this pan needs a queue there? I had seen queues for masala dosa outside MTR Hotel in Bangalore, but standing for a pan I thought is unacceptable at 9:30. So half the time I was thinking, shouldn't we go home and sleep? But my friend said, no, you'll change your mind after you eat pan. So we waited. After 20, 25 minutes, we reached that pan fellow, and this fellow bought pan. And I'm talking of 25, 27 years ago, where the pan at that time itself was 20 rupees. I thought it's atrocious. In Bangalore at that time, we could have bought 10 pans. But anyway, he paid and we ate, and it was possibly, my friend's description was, it is an art. You have to eat this pan. It's exquisite. And since I was not a connoisseur, I thought it tasted good, but beyond that, I was not really eating it every day to know what is better. If you ask me about coffee, I can give you 100 different reasons why some coffee is good or bad. But pan, my knowledge is very limited. And my friend told the pan maker, "Oh, बहुत बढ़िया था, बहुत खुशी हो गया. You know, thank you," and all those expressions that you give when something is nice for you. I saw the pan maker never even lifted his head. He was busy making the other pan. He never lifted his head to say anything. And then I was little kind of puzzled. Why is this pan maker not even reciprocating? A simple thank you or mujhe bhi kuch hua, something like that. Next day also, I stayed with him the next day also. Next day also, he took me to the pan. The same incident played out again. He was standing in line. We were standing in line. We went near him. He ate the pan and said, "Kushi ho gaya," and all that. So this time I couldn't hold back. I asked him, that fellow doesn't even respect you, doesn't even respond to you, doesn't even notice you. He just takes your money, gives you the pan. Why are you saying the pan is very good? And my friend's answer is always etched in my mind. He said, I don't say the pan is very good because I want him to say thank you for that. I don't say it because he has to feel good. I say it because the pan was good. It is my dharma. That's the way I feel. It has to be good, so I live my dharma. What he says or not is his problem. Why are you worried about it? So I think, Jivika, fighting for right is your problem and you should stand by it. What others say, will others stand by you? Will others come? Will your parents say go do it? Will somebody else say don't do it? It's irrelevant. So believe what you believe in and lead that life. That's what matters.
Thank you, sir. Looking at the chat box, I think we go have a lot many questions. I think we would be possible. We'll take three more questions. Yeah, a question from Ramesh Venkatraman. Do you think absolute equity or equality is a possibility? There has never been a time when we have had absolute equality. While we can try to fix opportunities to make it equal, we can never achieve the outcomes because that is always variable of individual capacities.
Every morning when your mother or wife or you start cooking, you expect to make the perfect meal. When you start cooking, you don't simply say, I want to make an ordinary sambar or ordinary rasam. You always believe that you'll make the best. So aspiration is different, end results are different. Society has to be driven by aspirations. And we only have to learn that if you're not attached to the results of your aspirations, there's going to be no frustration. So equity, equality are aspirations. Aspirations of a healthy, energetic, dynamic society. Not learning to manage frustrations out of not meeting those aspirations is a problem that we have to learn to contend with. So I believe, Ramesh, we have to live the aspiration of trying to bring in equity and equality. Like Aurobindo said it so beautifully, it's never going to happen. But what stops you from wanting to aspire to it? We all believe that we'll all attain moksha in this janma itself. We may be far away from it, hundreds of janmas from it. But you believe and you lead a life in a particular way, hoping that tomorrow you'll get closer to your destiny. Tomorrow you'll get closer to what you believe should happen to your life. Will it happen? It may. How are you sure it will not? We don't know. But trying is what we are sure of, and I think we should continue to do.
Mr. Ravi Kotwage has got a very interesting question. He says, is there anyone equivalent to becoming Swami Vivekananda nowadays. That means, what I mean is that anyone who could get the attention of the people of the world in one great speech.
I think it's a mistake to think only one speech of Swamiji got the world's attention. It's a very, very narrow understanding of Vivekananda. Vivekananda's Vivekananda even before he left the Indian shores to give the speech in Chicago. Possibly America learned about Vivekananda in 1893. You think the Maharajas of India, Raja of Khetri, Raja of Mysore, all the enormous devotees around India, people like Alasinga Perumal in Chennai and all those people, would have even really worked so hard for Swamiji? I don't think so. Even when he went about the country as a Parivrajaka, even when he went around in the name of Vividishananda, when he was not even known as Vivekananda, people knew what he was capable of, what his worth was. Hundreds of people, whether it's in Belgaum or in Mysore, in every other location that he went to. So he is already the fire of his personality, the fire of his purity, the enormous inner evolution was already there. So it's that speech was possibly one milestone that we all know and hear and speak about and celebrate. It's just an opportunity to celebrate that milestone. But what matters is Swami Vivekananda was extraordinary. Otherwise, you think Ramakrishna Paramahamsa would have proclaimed when he met him first time, why did you take so long to come to me? Because he knew what that power, that force, that personality was. I believe there are 7 billion Vivekanandas in the world waiting to express itself. Every one of us has that Vivekananda within us. The journey of our life is to awaken him, discover him, get it expressed for the betterment of mankind. Instead of waiting for that Messiah to wave the magic wand and say, Vivekananda is here to solve your problems, have the courage to live by his message, awaken the Vivekananda within you, and be a solution to the world's problem. Don't be a problem for the world's problems. I always think of, in Bangalore, when I travel and you travel and all of us travel, we all say this in traffic of Bangalore, and so many friends from Bangalore are here. I see Reguraj, I see so many others. You always say, oh my God, the traffic in Bangalore is horrible. The people in Bangalore are always on the streets. What we are not saying is, I am also in a car on the same street, which means I am as much a problem causing the traffic jam as much as anything else. So see yourself as a problem, and then you have to start seeing yourself as a solution. And when you start doing that, that inner Vivekananda is waking up. And that's what the world needs today.
We'll take last two questions, sir, with your kind permission. Yeah. A
I'm
question
fine.
from Srikant. Can you please share Swamiji's views on the Indian family system, sir?
Swamiji was extraordinarily great. In fact, in a chapter on the Karma Yoga, he writes about each is great in his own place, where he expounds how a good householder is as critical to society. A grihastha and all the practices of grihastha ashrama is extremely important to society as much as an extraordinary sannyasi. He says it is better to be a good householder than a bad sannyasi. So he says each is great in his own place. Society and social fabric cannot be sustained if we don't have all this. So he had really great conviction in the power of togetherness as a family, but he had a responsibility for the householder. He had a responsibility for the householder to sustain society. And it's not. I'm not saying this from Swamiji's words itself, but in a simple way, if you look at the way Manusmriti itself describes the responsibility of a householder, he says, as a householder, when you start earning money, he says, keep 25% for yourself. I personally try to subscribe to it. It has been a great value for me, at least in my personal life. Keep 25% for yourself. He said, start with being selfish. Take care of yourself. Buy some decent clothes to wear. Eat some good food. Keep 25% for society. You pay your taxes properly. Donate. Take care of charity. 25% of what you owe is for society. Keep 25% for your family. You're in that circle I spoke about. If they are happy, taken care of, then you'll also be kept happy. So keeping yourself happy, keeping small, bigger circle happy, the next larger circle of society happy. And the last 25%, just put it aside. You never know when the remaining three sets of people will need it. You may need it for yourself. You may fall sick and need it for treatment. Your family might need it, or society might need it. COVID crisis, epidemic, pandemic, earthquake, flood. That 25% which you're saving is for the benefit of all the remaining 3/4 that you've kept. If you can lead your life like this, I think, what more do you want? Society has to be a better place.
Yes, sir. We'll take the last one from Mr. H.L. Satish. Have we, as a nation, failed in character building. One related question from one more participant: how can we inspire the youth of today when the youth, most of them get everything even before they ask for it?
They didn't get it. We give it to them. So let's be clear. I think many times we sort of externalize the problem. Have we internalized it? How many of us have been responsible parents? Parenting is about shaping not just the economic destiny of your children, sending them to the best possible schools, giving them the best possible training, sending them to the Bates and Fitchis and IIT trainings and getting into IITs, but building character, investing on their growth in an overall sense. Being a responsible parent means investing them in the culture of this country, in the civilizational knowledge of this country, in the principles of humanity itself. Have we done that? If you have done that, then you're right to feel frustrated that society is not responding. How many of us are invested in building our own characters? Forget characters of our children, of the future of the young people of this country. We have failed to be responsible role models to society, and then we blame the others. I think we need to shake off this thinking and start. I have a very simple philosophy: start off with ourselves. And this comes from the message of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. A young mother comes with a 4-5-year-old child to him and says, please advise my child. Everybody calls you Jnani, everybody calls you Bhagwan, God. My son is addicted to jaggery. All the time he's eating jaggery, and this is believed those days that if you eat jaggery, you'll have insects in your stomach. I think his stomach is full of insects. Please advise him. Ramakrishna says, come tomorrow. The lady very faithfully goes next day. Because it's Bhagwan, he'll change. He'll just touch his head and he'll stop eating jaggery. Next day also same thing happens. Ramakrishna says, come after a week. Again she goes after a week. Again the story goes, she says, come after 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, he tells the child and says, it is not good for health. Don't eat it. The mother gets very upset. For just saying this, why do you have to make me come 5 times? And Ramakrishna had a very beautiful explanation. He said, the first day you came, I realized I am also addicted to jaggery. I also love jaggery. So whenever I get a chance, I eat it. So I didn't feel comfortable telling the child don't eat. I thought I can give it up in 1 day. Next day you came, I realized I'm not able to give it up. I broke my own promise. I thought 1 week later, surely I'll give up. So this happened. Now I'm confident I've given up. So now I believe that I can tell your child something. So I think building the future, building our young people should start with us. Once we, like I told you, live with the conviction that I am the unchangeable, then change will happen. Then the world will be a better place. So let's begin with ourselves. That's all the control we have in this life. Just over ourselves, our mind, and you'll realize how little control actually you have over your own self and your mind. Do that, and truly we can create a great space for humanity itself. Thank you all so much. Such a pleasure being with all of you.
Thank you very much, sir. Before having the concluding remarks, I think I'll read out this one particular reflection put up on the chat box that summarizes perhaps the wonderful evening. Thank you, Dr. Balu, for the wonderful absorbing lecture. Very inspirational talk. We can see the power of conviction in your speech. Truly a reflection of the values that you have been practicing. Thanks a lot. God bless. That's a comment from Mr. Manohar from Bangalore. So with those words, I think I'll request Dr. Rekha to kindly give us her concluding remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think all said on behalf of all of us present here. I would first of all like to thank Balu sir for yet another inspiring talk and reminding us again on how Swamiji's life and teachings are relevant to our every action. And to all the audience, as Bhargavi mentioned, you can read more about Dr. Balu's reflection in his books and also in his blog. I think Bhargavi will shortly post it on the chat box. And thank you all for those enriching questions too. So on the hosting side, I am Rekha, and along with Mr. Sudarshan, Bhargavi, and all my SVYM colleagues, wishing you all a peaceful, safe, healthy, and a happy new year. And I would like to take this opportunity to also announce that with Sankranti coming up this week, we have organized a webinar again tomorrow on the symbolism of festival and celebrations, which is yet another opportunity to appreciate our country's cultural and religious heritage. So we will wish again, many of you can join us again. With this, thanking Balu sir once again. So good night to all of you.
Thank you.